Hey, this will be a walkthrough on cardiac output, meaning how much blood is your heart pumping per minute. This is measured in millimeters per minute, and it is stroke volume multiplied by heart rate. Stroke volume is measured in milliliters per beat, and your heart rate is measured in beats per minute. If you multiply the amount of beats you have per minute by the amount of millimeters per beat, you wind up with the amount of milliliters per minute that you are pumping. Your heart rate is directly regulated by the sinoatrial node in the heart and the atrioventricular node. So if you have some sort of dangerous situation, or say somebody that you think is hot walks by, your sympathetic nervous system will send a message to the sinoatrial node as well as the atrioventricular node and the myocardium itself, meaning the heart muscle. The nodes will be the nodes activated will cause your heart rate to increase, and the myocardium activated will cause a increase in contractile force. The sympathetic nervous system does this by dropping norepinephrine into the synaptic cleft. The parasympathetic nervous system, don't get confused with that PNS, that is not peripheral, that is parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system will, if after you've escaped your danger situation and you're relaxing now, the parasympathetic nervous system will release acetylcholine into the sinoatrial node and onto the sinoatrial node and the atrioventricular node, which will in turn decrease heart rate. Obviously, as your heart rate decreases, your cardiac output decreases. Stroke volume is directly affected by a number of things. To start with, we have total peripheral resistance. This is a measurement of how much tension is there in your arteries. So if you have an artery that is squeezed closed, it's going to be kind of hard for your heart to push blood through that closed opening. Meaning that the higher your total peripheral resistance, the lower your stroke volume will be. Contractile force will positively infect stroke volume, meaning the harder you squeeze, the harder your heart squeezes, the more liquid will be pushed by that squeezing action. The Frank-Starling law has a beneficial effect on the contractile force of a muscle. The Frank-Starling law is only talking about cardiac muscle, and it has to do with what level of stretch is there in your sarcomeres themselves. So if your sarcomeres are stretched to about 120%, your myosin heads will be grabbing the thin filaments from the thick filaments, and it will be able to pull farther, meaning that you will have a larger contraction. And since you have a larger contraction, you have more contractile force. And since you have more contractile force, you will be pumping more blood per beat. The end diastolic volume also positively affects stroke volume. What is end diastolic volume? Diastole is the period of your heartbeat when the muscle is relaxing. We are talking about ventricular diastole. So that means after your ventricle in your heart has contracted and pushed blood out, how much blood is left in the chamber when it's relaxing. That's your end diastolic volume. The end diastolic volume is directly affected by how much blood is being brought back into the heart. Obviously, you have the more blood that there is being brought to your heart, the more blood there is to be left in the chamber after pumping. How much blood is being brought back to your heart is affected by a few things. First, the more blood you have, the more blood will be brought back to your heart. Total blood volume directly positively affects venous return. That's pretty straightforward. Now, your total blood volume is affected by a few things as well. Antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, is a hormone that your body uses to retain water. How does it do it? Well, it stops you from peeing as much. Aldosterone has a very similar effect. What it does is it makes you retain more salt, and since salt attracts water, the more salt you retain, the more water you retain. The more water and salt you retain in your blood, the more blood volume you have. I feel like that one explains itself. The atrial natriuretic peptide is sort of weird. Mostly because we think about the heart as an organ that does nothing but pumps blood. But in actuality, it's sort of an endocrine gland as well. Your atria are actually releasing this atrial natriuretic peptide, and what it does is it makes you release more water and also more salt. So that means it makes you pee more. And if you're peeing out more of your water and your salt from your blood, you obviously have less blood. Less blood means less venous return, which means less end diastolic volume, which means less stroke volume. So the atrial natriuretic peptide is directly affecting the glomerulus in the nephron. What it does, or what it's thought to do, is it vasodilates the afferent arteriole, meaning the arteriole that's leading right into the glomerulus of the nephron, and it actually vasoconstricts the efferent arteriole, meaning the arteriole that's leaving the nephron. So if we have a system of hoses where when we're leading into a certain place, we are allowing more water to go in, but the route out of that place is restricting flow, and we keep pumping more in there. You have to understand that the capillaries in the glomerulus are fenestrated, so there's actually little pores for the liquid and nutrients and wastes and whatnot to squeeze out of. And if we build up pressure in there, more stuff will squeeze out. That is atrial natriuretic peptide. Okay, so it inhibits aldosterone production, and aldosterone retains salt. Retaining salt causes water to be retained. So if we inhibit the retention of salt, we are actually lowering the amount of water in your system. All right. Venous return is regulated in another set of factors directly by the venous pressure. So that means how much resistance is there in the venous system to the blood that's trying to flow through it. That is regulated by the skeletal muscle pump, which is directly affected by how much activity you have. The more you are using your skeletal muscle, the more your skeletal muscle will pump blood through the venous system. The more blood is being pumped through the venous system, the greater your venous pressure. The greater your venous pressure, the more the right atria will draw blood into itself, which is venous return, and that affects end diastolic volume and stroke volume directly. Venoconstriction is talking about activating or deactivating, not completely, but increasing or decreasing the amount of constriction of the muscular tunic of the venous system. So if we have a hose that is squeezing tightly, however much fluid is in that thing will be under greater pressure. If we have that same amount of fluid in the same hose and the hose is not squeezing hardly at all, we will have less pressure. So the higher your venoconstriction and the higher your skeletal muscle pump return rate, the greater your venous pressure. The greater your venous pressure is the greater your venous return. The greater your venous return is the greater your end diastolic volume. The greater your end diastolic volume, the greater your stroke volume. The greater your stroke volume and heart rate, the greater your cardiac output. Hope that helps. Let me know if I made any mistakes.